Welcome to the Anti-Architect Podcast. I am your host, Christian Giordano. As president and owner of the design firm Mancini Duffy, I am driven by a quest for learning and radically changing the industry. With this podcast, I'm hoping to improve the industry that I'm so passionate about by taking a critical look at how architects work through a variety of voices and shared experiences. Hello, Anti-Architect Podcast listeners. I'm excited to bring you part 2 of my special episodes of the Anti-Architect Podcast. This episode is our second guest from Shadow Ventures and Shadow Partners. In fact, it's the founder and managing partner, KP Reddy. We spoke to Jeff Eccles, the Senior Director of Marketing, on the previous episode of the Anti-Architect Podcast. KP Reddy is the founder and CEO of both Shadow Ventures and Shadow Partners, a seed-stage technology investment firm. He is a globally recognized authority in the AEC environment with AI, robotics, automation, mobile applications, and cloud computing. KP is a civil engineer by background and wrote the textbook, the ultimate textbook on BIM for owners and developers. He is a frequent lecturer at Georgia Institute of Technology and is a sought-after subject matter expert, frequently speaking worldwide on BIM and the built environment. KP has exited 3 successful technology companies and ran enterprise transformation at Gehry Technologies, started by the world-renowned architect Frank Gehry, which ultimately was exited to Trimble. He is also the General Manager of ATDC at Georgia Tech, one of the oldest technology incubators in the country. KP, thank you so much for being my guest here on the podcast.
Good to be here.
So I want to kind of tell a little story about you and my familiarity with you. Back in early 2019, you gave me a space on your stage talking at one of your Shadow Summits. And I had just started developing a virtual reality tool. I don't even think we had the name at that point, but I came down with a few other people, some other engineers, and we gave a little talk about how architects and designers have basically been using the same methods for the last 200 years or more, and we haven't changed a bit, and that these series of technologies were going to help us design. And so you gave me that time on your stage, which was amazing. And then years later, I'm not sure if you remember this, but you and I had a conversation over Zoom, and I was seeking advice about this specific tool, and you didn't hold back. You provided me with very candid advice. And that honestly set me in sort of course-corrected what we were doing with our technology and how we were using it and how we were marketing it. So first and foremost, I want to thank you for being so generous with your time and playing, and helping me in some of the things that we've been doing.
Oh, you're welcome. Not everybody takes my direct feedback as well as others. So it's good to hear when people took it and did something with it versus just hanging up the phone and getting mad at me.
Yeah, I remember you said to me something like, listen, you've got a great idea here. It's a great thing, but you should do this and this with it, not what you're thinking. And I thought, oh, okay, that actually makes perfect sense. So I know you're not an architect by education, but you are an engineer. And I know you know plenty of architects. So I figure I'll ask this question anyway. If you had to pick one thing, what annoys you about most architects?
Really, this dissonance that it's their customers' building and project and not theirs.
Yes, that is. I've seen that.
Yeah, turns out it's the client's building; it's not yours.
Yes, I've witnessed that before. I think I might have told this on this podcast before, but we had a designer. I swear, I almost jumped over the table to strangle him. The client was saying that they wanted some detail on their building, and he said, "Well, you cannot have that on my building." And I thought, "Uh-oh, here we go." And the client just immediately probably turned, smoke came out of his ears and said, "Your building? What the hell are you talking about?" But yes, I have literally heard those exact words.
Yeah.
What are your biggest frustrations with the AEC industry in general? What kind of bothers you about just sort of the general industry?
I think that, we tend to not be very good at being client-centric or user-centric.
Okay.
If we're designing and building a hospital, it's not just about the hospital and the owners of the hospital. It's about the patients, doctors, nurses, et cetera. And that we're developing and building a product that creates some experience for them. It creates some, change in their life. It's a bigger calling. And I think, if your head's down trying to get submittals done and respond to RFIs, I think we tend to lose sight of that. We tend to lose sight of the why and the who. And I get it. We have budgets, we have schedules, we have all these other pressures that seem very tactical, and it's easy to lose track. But I think just how we think about being client focused and client centered, we could do a lot better at it.
Yeah, agreed. I want to talk a little bit about BIM, building information modeling, for those that don't know, because you were one of the early adapters, investors, pioneers in BIM. I didn't realize that about you as I was doing the research. You correct me if I'm wrong, but you were an early investor in Revit.
I was not. I actually missed I went on a 6-week vacation, and when I came back, they were sold off.
Oh, but you had met with them before, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's too bad. But you worked with Frank Gehry, who was a former professor of mine at UCLA, and honestly one of the nicest people I know in the business. And Gehry was sort of developing his own version of BIM. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
So tell us a little bit about that and what kind of gravitated you towards that technology.
Yeah, I think, the story starts a little bit sooner because I started writing software when I was 13. My dad was a civil engineer, so I was writing structural engineering software for him as a kid. So when I started my first startup in 97, it was construction management on the web. And all the contractors kind of laughed at me, like, this web thing is a toy. We're not ever going to use this to do business. So I fortunately pivoted off that. But when I saw BIM and I kind of missed the opportunity for Gehry Technology Corp, I'm like, these are the same people that said the web was a fad and wasn't going to go anywhere. This is a very complicated tool. It's got such high potential. If they couldn't figure out the web a decade earlier, I'm not sure how we're going to get there, with this. So, I just saw the potential of it in a major way, that in a way to really kind of transform how we do things.
Yeah. And I would say, so do you think we'll ever get to delivering the model, the BIM model, as the actual deliverable? One of the things that one of the initiatives that we have in our office with our technology folks there is, we put all of this information into the model. Every detail, a wall knows it's a wall, floor knows it's a floor. Well, the ductwork knows what it's supposed to do and why. And then at the end of the day, we basically just flatten it out and print it out on giant sheets of paper, and then hand it to a contractor and say, okay, here, build this. And 50%, maybe even 90% of the value of that coordinated model that exists in sort of that virtualized world gets thrown out out with the water, right? So Do you ever think we'll get to that point where we can deliver the model as the actual final product?
Well, I think I would two things. One, I think this disconnect between what a designer's deliverable is and what a contractor's deliverable is the big starting point, right? We should both be aligned that we're delivering a building, right? That the deliverable is a building. It's not CDs.
Mm-hmm.
CDs are a step towards communication, right? The reality is when we have a workforce that has been trained on this language of 2D and specs, which is what it is, I don't know that the person in the field swinging a hammer will know what to do. Right? It's not the form of communication that they will use to build the building. And so I think the question really around, is if your job is not to deliver a BIM, but your job is to deliver a building, how does BIM, the CDs, how do they all play into that factor of delivering a building?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how much benefit there is if you hand a drywall contractor a BIM. I'm not sure how helpful that is to them,
mm-hmm. unless
you actually drew the details on how to hang drywall. Now, one of the things, I didn't spend a lot of time over at Gehry, but I spent enough time. And I think one of the things that Frank was pretty focused on is my buildings are very unique. It's not something any builder has ever built before. And we have to be super descriptive in the BIM around means and methods. Because if this is being built in the middle of nowhere, we don't know the capability of the contractor. And so how he really approached BIM was designing a constructible model. It wasn't for drawings. It was, here's where you will weld. Here is where you will torque this. It was very detailed. It was a lot of work, and it also required a team that actually knew how the details of how a building went together.
Sure.
Right. And so I think the question around delivering the BIM, it's like for what purpose and why?
Okay.
If it's to deliver what I call the owner's manual of the building, hey, owner, here's the 3D representation of your building that's hopefully pretty close to what was actually built. And here's what's in it. And it's kind of a record, a 3D record. That could be beneficial. But we saw, when I was writing my book, I talked to over 100 owners. And by the way, it's been a minute since I wrote that book. And the fact that people still buy it is a little bit mind-boggling. It tells us how fast we're moving around here. My book should be irrelevant. But, they said, look, the maintenance person is not going to look at a 3D model to go fix a pipe. They're going to look at the plans anyway. So I think this idealized view of, are we ever going to deliver a BIM? Like, how about we deliver a building? How about we use tools like BIM to simulate and mitigate risk, both, construction risk, design risk, operational risk, and really use it to run kind of sims on the building and know that, until robots are building buildings and a robot can take in a 3D model and go build it, we're probably going to have plans and specs as one of the deliverables.
Sure.
I don't think it goes away.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and I it's funny you mentioned the accuracy of the model, because we're working on a very large project in New York City where we're doing several floors in a brand new building. I mean, literally, this thing is brand new. It just opened. And the first thing the project managers and the contractors and everybody involved with the building has said to us is, yeah, don't use that BIM model. Stay away from that. Start over. It's a mess. It's not accurate. Run away from it. So very much along the lines of what you're talking about.
Yeah. It's also interesting too, the contractors that recreate the BIM model off the CDs.
Yeah.
There is a value of them having to interpret. It's all about interpreting the design.
Sure.
And for them to interpret it in their office, and ask questions then versus asking questions in the form of RFIs or whatever else versus while they're in the field, there is actually value. I know there's this idea like, oh my God, we're building the model twice. But the reality is I think the contractor and the subs benefit a lot from understanding the project.
Yeah.
And being able to ask lots of questions and hopefully find gaps in the design. One
of our most valuable employees is, in fact, someone that worked for a contractor for 20 years, who's come back to, was an architect, worked for 20 years, and now has come back into architecture. And it's a very different perspective when he's looking at a CD set and he's marking it up. He'll always say, I look at the drawings of how it gets built, not about the pretty picture that you created and, on the sheet. And I think if we can do more of that around it, you do get a better deliverable at the end. Doesn't matter if you print it out or project it in a 3D map on the wall. It doesn't matter. Before we get into shadow ventures and shadow partners, I just want to talk about some of the definitions of things. So my audience is largely architects and designers, engineers, furniture folks. I would love for you to define, what venture capital is, what corporate venture capital is, what the difference is with private equity, things like that. These are terms that get thrown around a lot. I'm not sure everybody knows exactly what they are.
Yeah. So private equity is really having equity ownership, either 100% or some portion of, in a private company, i.e. it's not traded on the stock market. It's a private company. And the mission with private equity is usually they find companies that have locked up value, i.e. maybe they're not being operated very efficiently, and they buy them, they create efficiencies, they grow them, and then they sell them to the next person. Or sometimes they take it public and they get their money out. Venture capital is a very similar model, other than we are focused mostly on the creation of enterprise value. In other words, the value of the business, not necessarily the cash flows and optimizing. We're 100% focused on growth, which means we invest early in product ideas. There are VCs that invest in services companies. Most of them are not very successful. Generally, VC applies really well in product companies because product companies require a phase of research and development. They require 2 to 3 years of building something before you sell it to a customer. Services, as long as you have a customer, you can fill out a timesheet. There is no developmental stage,
and you're only as good as the latest thing that you just have a service for.
Exactly. Exactly. Corporate So the thing with regular VC is we operate under a law called the Power Law. Power Law is you invest in 10 companies, one of them delivers all your returns, and 9 of them just kind of go away. Which means you're looking for betting on 10 companies that have the potential to be $1 billion company, that have accelerated growth and high potential. And so that's our job, is to figure out, does this company have the potentiality? A lot of companies, I probably see 50 companies a week. I talk to 12 entrepreneurs a week. Many of them are good businesses, but they are not going to grow at a rate of pace to make up for the other 9 investments that didn't go well. And so that's what you're always looking for. You're really looking for that grand slam. Singles and doubles are not our game. So that's venture capital. And a lot of times, we use terms like winner takes all, where we are really looking for companies that will own and dominate a market. We don't use a search engine. We Google things, right? That's what you're looking for.
Right. Your Uber.
Corporate VC is less about the financial returns. It's much more about strategy to the business. And so they might invest in things that don't have a winner takes all type strategy, but they are early companies that if they invest in, they think it'll give them either insights into their own business. It might give them a product or a tool that they can using their own business to either creates more efficiency or it's a new service line, et cetera. But CVC is much more about corporate strategy than it is about finance.
Okay. And so tell us about Shadow Ventures and Shadow Partners. What are you looking for when investing? Just a little bit of the history of the company, and then I want to get into a little bit about the line of business that you're in specifically to construction tech and all of those things.
Yeah, I think you'd mentioned I was running Georgia Tech's incubator ATDC, and it basically decided I didn't want to start another company. I was just going to invest, so I was starting to invest on my own. And then I started getting phone calls from friends in the industry saying, look, we're doing innovation. We're doing this. We're doing that. Why don't you come help us? So really started off doing a lot of consulting work. So helped Thornton Tomasetti set up their innovation strategy, post Weidlinger integration, and launching Twin, which was their incubator, and spinning out companies for them and doing all of that. And those very, very successful. As well as companies like JB&B, so did work for them. So there's, and several architecture firms as well. It was just like, what is this innovation thing? What should we be doing? We built this IP. We think it's worth something. Come take a look at it for us. And what that evolved to was, KP, how do we invest in startups? And, I was like, well, here's the problem. For it to work, you have to invest in 10, 20, 30, 100 startups. Like, it's not pick one here, one there. You'll never get enough diversification, and you'll never get a winner. You'll get lucky, but you might get lucky, but you'll never get a winner. And so they said, well, why don't you go do that? So why don't you go start a fund and you go do that, and we'll all invest. So we're now on our second fund. But, our investors are the Thornton Tomasettis and JB&Bs and Siska Hennessy's and Hensel Phelps and WGI and Walter P. Moore and probably another 50 that I've left off. So, and the idea is, if you really, I don't know that I envisioned it this way, but it really kind of makes sense now. If we believe our industry has a lot of opportunity to move forward, but no one firm can invest in R&D in a way. It's not like pharma. Pharma, you can have 10 companies and they can go to spend billions of dollars in R&D. No one company in our industry can really invest enough in R&D to make a difference. And so what the firms really become about is having industry invest in our fund. And it's essentially becomes the engine for growth around research and development and investing in startups that are making a difference. And all of our investors, so our investors, they're called limited partners. So we usually just refer to LPs. So most of our LPs are all from the industry. And it's fantastic because as much as we know a good bit, they know the nuances.
Sure.
They know, they know all the different little details. They know the cultural headwinds. You could sell that into a contractor, but if they're a union shop, you're not going to sell it to. Like, I don't know those things. So it really is team ball. And the way I always say is, none of us develop a building alone. Why do we think we're going to solve some of the greatest challenges facing our industry alone? Like, it's team ball.
Yeah. Do you believe that our industry is, because I think we get a bad rap with this, but do you think we're slow to adapt technology and innovation? I don't know that we're, it's slow compared to what, right? And I think that's where I get a little fired up is when they want to, people want to compare us to other industries. And it's like, you cannot take the largest industry in the world and start comparing it to much smaller industries. Industries that, I love my iPhone, but guess what? I throw it away every 3 to 4 years. We don't get to throw away buildings every 3 or 4 years. Yeah. We don't get to, we have the opposite of planned obsolescence. That's true.
And I think there isn't really an industry that's like that. There really isn't an industry that has to worry about, one, that it has to last for a long time and be design relevant and engineering relevant and last, and has massive operational costs and touches society in major ways and has to stay relevant to society.
Yeah.
And I think it's people that want to trivialize it by saying, oh, we're laggards or whatever. I'm like, no, we're doing the best we can, moving the biggest and most impactful industry in the world.
Absolutely. And I one of the things that I try to talk about is everything we do is unique, or at least 99.9% of what we do is unique. I mean, even if you take a Chick-fil-A or a McDonald's, while they may look almost identical, there's a nuance in every single one of those places based on site conditions, based on building departments, based on local codes. It's always different. And someone has to interpret that and figure it out. And yes, maybe there's an AI somewhere that can do that. But at the end of the day, that has to be translated to someone's hands that physically actually build something and put something together. We're not, listen, it's amazing. BMW can do on-demand manufacturing, and they can build a 3 Series, and then after that, build a supercar right behind it, and then build an SUV after that, all in the same, with the same robots. That's amazing. But we don't do that. We don't have the same thing over and over and over again. So it makes that adoption really difficult.
And I've owned a few BMWs, and they generally last about 5 years.
That's right. That's a very good point.
They get the, it's amazing. They get the benefit of saying, oh, sorry, we have to replace your entire electrical panel. I'm like, it's 1 year old.
Yeah.
We don't get to do that, but no one cuts us slack around, performance and that kind of thing. And so I think, and I think that's the difference. And, when we start talking about like national rollouts, and you're dealing, right? And you're dealing with different architects, different engineers, different everything.
Yeah.
In every market you go into.
Yeah.
And I always tell people, it's like we look a lot less like manufacturing. We look a lot more like the movie industry.
Yeah, it's very true.
We show up, we do a project, and every once in a while we work with the same actors, directors, producers, but, not always.
And nobody wants the same thing. We could, I guess you could do a Sears Roebuck, pre-manufactured house in a factory and bring it to site. But everyone wants some sort of tweak on that, and everybody wants something a little bit different. And nobody wants to live in a neighborhood where everybody's house is exactly the same from place to place to place. So I think people fool themselves to say that we're not, we're not innovating in that realm.
Yeah, I was one of the first investors in a company called Icon 3D. They did 3D printed houses. And I used to get asked all the time. In early days, I got asked, like, why did you invest in this? Are you nuts? And I said, what they're doing is the difference between building a house or building a home. Mm-hmm. That an affordable home that the owner is part of the design process is fantastic. They'll never get that experience somewhere else. They'll get to pick what color shutters or brick versus stucco, some basic things. But and I think that's the difference between, like, in the prefab world. I don't think we can create pre-manufactured houses. I don't know that we can do homes. Like, I think we're getting there with technology. But, I drive around Atlanta. There's still some of those Sears Roebuck homes around, and you can see them right away. But I think that's the difference between a house and a home.
Yeah, agreed. And I do know Icon, the 3D printed homes that you're doing, and they are unique, which is sort of the point, right? Of having, to me, actually, anything 3D printed should be unique. It should be something that you can't get through any traditional, whether it's manufacturing or building or even just a glass blowing or an infusion method, because you can do layers upon layers that are different ways of working, and it pushes the profession, pushes design ultimately.
It's forward. Also, I think I get a lot of questions about I'm not sure if I like the design. I'm like, it's a new design style. Like, don't compare it to what we know. Mm-hmm. it's a new design style. And, I like contemporary homes. I'm not a big fan of traditional homes. Like, it's the same thing. And it's not going to meet you can't compare it to other homes when it's an entirely different style.
Yeah. Listen, I thought the Tesla truck was the dumbest thing I've ever seen. And then I saw one in person, and now I want to get one. So, so talk to me about a little bit about the various companies, maybe the top companies that you have now that you've seeded and grown in the industry. What are some of them, and where do you see them going?
Yeah, so I think some of the ones I'm excited about. I came from the civil engineering side, so one of our companies, EcoBot, is basically streamlining the entire wetlands delineation and kind of the environmental side of things. And part of it, what's interesting about what they're doing is they're collecting so much data. They have more data than anybody. So when we talk about climate change and, the first early, the canary in the coal mine is biodiversity, right? We know this. And so the fact that they're collecting lots of data that'll give us early indicators around biodiversity changes, I think is super meaningful, and they're doing a great job. Green Badger, who does like lead management, both from design into construction, they've done extremely well. Once again, I think our industry wants to do the right thing around all these topics. But if the tools don't exist and it's too hard, then it's easy to abandon stuff. So I think Green Badger has really helped by delivering a great product that helps people do what they want to do, but do it well without the friction, has been a good one. Bot Built, which is another one of our robotics companies. They have robots that frame houses. So, from us, we got 3D printed houses, and we have, stick built. And I think if you look at the larger driver of building, how do you build affordable housing? Well, you build them affordably. Yeah. It's fairly simple. Mm-hmm. Government subsidies, that's all great, right? I'm not in the policy business. I'm in the, how do we do things better business? And I think there are, if you just look at how much, actually Tommy with Green Badger was showing me these waste reports that he gets on construction jobs, because that's part of what they track in their system. And I'm like, it's amazing how much tonnage gets hauled off a new construction site, not a demo site, a new construction site. It's just unbelievable. So, I think robots have a way of being more efficient, not as creating as much waste. So I think there's a great opportunity to reduce how much waste we create. I was also surprised when I was looking at these reports, like how much of it ends up in the landfill. Sure. I mean, it's just astounding. And none of that is ultimately tracked in LEED or WELL or any of those standards, right? The waste during construction. Yeah. Actually, Green Badger tracks it. Yeah. Which is amazing. Yeah. No, it's and I think that's where we've got to really think about how do we just do things better. So yeah, those are some of our companies that I think are probably impactful to your audience. We have another company, Jet Build. If you think about construction management software and project management software, I grew up using Primavera. Mm-hmm. It was a beast. Yep. We haven't really seen any products come out that are easy to use for all parties. For the contractor, you would never give your developer a login to your Procore system. It's too complicated. Right. So Jet Build's done a really good job of simplifying, call it construction management for the masses. It's self-service. You log in, you get going, you send invites to people, and it all just works, and it's easy to use, not a lot of training required. It's very intuitive. Yeah, you're right. There's the Procores, then there's we use Nuforma on things. They don't speak to one another. You end up with Google Sheets sort of somewhere hidden in the background, and who knows what's going on there. Before we talk a little bit about AI, your career, from the outside looking in looks perfect, right? And I know myself as an entrepreneur, as an owner, it never is how it looks, right?
Can you share a story about a time when you had to make a difficult decision that significantly impacted sort of your career trajectory?
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. The other book I wrote is What You Know About Startups is Wrong. And a lot of people buy it under this idea that there's some magical, here's the 5 steps to. In fact, it's none of those things. It's a little bit my life story. It's a little bit of like all to your point, like the failures and all of that. And I think for me, the biggest thing was early on not understanding how to treat people and really not knowing how to balance, my life. So my book talks a lot about everything from almost dying to my divorce I talk about all of it. Right.
Wow.
And really waking up one day and say like, the most foundational thing I've got to be is a great dad that raises fine young men. That's really the job. All this other stuff is just kind of fun and games. Right. So that was kind of my wake up call, and really understanding like how important, it is to like, shape. And now it's, I think my older kids, I have a 23-year-old, a 21-year-old, and a 14-month-old.
Oh, wow.
So I do find myself spending a lot of time with other people's kids too. Trying to like help shape and influence. And honestly, lately, just trying to get them to come into our industry. Oh. I spend so much time with these kids. I'm like, you can fly a drone professionally. Like, really? Where? I'm like, for a construction company.
It's true.
Try to get these kids excited. We have a problem. We have a problem. We lack the sizzle that a pizza delivery app company has. It's like, trying to talk to these kids and bring them the sizzle.
Yeah, I love it. So let's talk a little bit about innovation and artificial intelligence, because I feel like you're the right person to talk about that with. You're obviously touching it on some of the companies that you're using. Where do you predict architects and designers being able to harness the power of AI?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. I think this fear of your customers, a developer's just going to use AI and design a building. And my joke to that is that would imply that they actually know what they want.
That's true.
Which is 0% of the time.
That's true.
So whatever it is, they're going to need help like feeding the AI all the information to actually iterate what they actually want and what will work. I think, my feeling, and it's so, I always find it so fascinating. Like when people read my bio, that bio is like 10 years old. And so I've been talking about AI for a minute, right? And we've made investments in AI, 4 or 5 years ago. And so a lot of what I'm seeing is AI for the masses. Right now, when I was at Georgia Tech, I was building websites in 1992. It was very difficult. It wasn't, now people go off and get Squarespace and they have a website, right? Mm-hmm. So what you've really seen is AI to the forefront and being consumer grade so that everybody can use it. So I think that what we have to look at as an industry is your customers know about AI. If all we do is use AI to build operational efficiencies in our back office, it will be a fast path to the bottom. Your clients will understand this. They won't want to pay you less. Like, oh, aren't you just using AI? Like, why am I paying you so much? And so I think that's where people have to really think differently about how they approach using AI. And, how do we use AI to create, because sometimes they don't exist, create or shape a client experience? In other words, we take technology and we move it furthest away from the customer experience as possible. We talk about it internally. Oh, now we can do door details faster, right? That has nothing to do with the client. Client doesn't care, right? And so if you really flip it a little bit and say, how am I going to use AI to maybe even define a client experience? Because the reality is our clients, basically we're a necessary evil for them. If they could snap their fingers and just have an asset that generated cash flow tomorrow, they would just do it. Mm-hmm. I don't know that they're saying like, man, I love my architect. What they really say is, man, my architect's really smart. Very frustrating. So frustrating. Right. I had one developer say, why does this industry act like they've never built a building before? So I think the opportunity is really to say, like, take a step back and look at your business, your firm, and say, like, what is my strategy? And how do I want to shape my client's experience? And then use tools like AI to do that. Not the other way around. And the further you get away from your client, that should be the wake-up call that maybe you're making the wrong decisions.
It's a really good point. And I feel like I've already heard that in our industry, right? Oh, it's going to do the construction documents for us, and that part will be out of our realm. And I don't see that happening because, again, everything's different, but maybe at some point it does. It doesn't really matter.
Let's assume it does. But does that mean I get to spend more time with my client? Does that mean I get to spend more time doing more research around, how the patients are going to use a hospital? Does it mean we actually get to spend more time on the strategic things and working with clients in a closer way? And really, it always used to, as an engineer, I used to always feel like the minute I left the room, that's when they actually started talking about the project. It's like, okay, civil engineer's done, get out of here. And so I think if it frees up time, if you can auto generate, think about the opportunity to iterate designs.
Yeah.
And do it quickly. Think about the opportunity to say, hey, it turns out office space is at an all-time low. We need to rethink our office space. We've got too much office space in this mixed-use development. Or I'm using a predictive data platform that says in 10 years, this is really going to be about retail. It's not going to be about office. So let me design something that I know will adapt in the future. Think about predicting adaptive reuse in the future.
Sure.
Let me work on those things. Because whether we like it or not, the drawing part's always been a commodity. Whether it's AI doing it or a room full of people drawing, right? It
is. And ironically, I find that, I was very early on in college. I did a lot of 3D renderings and I was the 3D modeling guy. It was new and coming up when I started. And, I would do these amazing, at the time, they would take, days to render. You'd get these, what were theoretically beautiful, although now they're done so quickly and it's almost like cheating, renderings. And then when I got to the profession, I actually sat next to a watercolorist for the first few years of my first job. And what I learned from him was that the watercoloring actually was a better design, part of a better design process, because it left a lot up to the imagination going forward, where the 3D rendering was very specific, and the clients, they worried about, well, that's not the person I would see in my render. That's not the person who's going to use my my building. I'm looking for this demographic. And you'd concentrate on just, weird things that had nothing to do with the architecture side of the thing. And the watercolorist could crank through, 10 beautiful watercolorings in a day, and they'd have design decisions made by clients in no time. And then you'd have these precise 3D renderings that took, we'd go back and we'd have to redo them and redo them and redo them. You never got anywhere with them. So in a weird way, the technology sometimes pushes us further away from, making good design decisions along the way, which I find interesting. Yeah, 100%. What are some of the companies that you have under your umbrella that are doing AI?
So one of the ones that is doing a lot of AI is a company called Aren, AREN.ai. So you basically take drone imagery, fly it around a bridge. It will take all that data, create a 3D model of the bridge. It will find all the cracks, prioritize the cracks, and run it through engineering analysis software to predict maintenance. That's where they started, was bridges. Now they do facades. Sure. They do roofs. They do pavements. And it's like magic.
Wow.
And you think about that, you think about maintaining assets and maintenance, and we kind of wait for things to break before we maintain them. So really understanding and being able to plan and budget for that stuff is pretty strong. And then the runway use case is really interesting because shutting down an airport to inspect the runway versus just flying a drone real quick and getting all the data you need is pretty amazing.
Absolutely. Wow. And last question on the innovation side. Do you think architects and designers really know what it means to innovate?
Not really. I think so. We talked about Shadow Ventures. Shadow Partners is our advisory business. So we spend a lot of time with firms helping them build better strategies. And I think if innovation is driven by the IT department, it's probably not innovation. So I think there's the iterative innovation and adopting tools. But then, when I talk about how do you design a client experience, that's also part of innovation.
Sure.
And I don't think that strategic thinking is happening by a lot of firms. That's what we're getting called into a lot. Part of it is like, hey, KP, what do we do about AI? Should we shut it down? Like, what should we do? Like, yes, you should shut it down. Shut down the internet too. While you're at it. But there's that policies. Yeah, the policy stuff we're getting sucked into, and our consultants are getting sucked into that. But it's also like the opportunity. Like, how do we think about this? And then also, how do you think about building IP and building products in a firm, whether it's software, hardware, whatever? There's been very limited success because it's a lack of know-how.
Mm-hmm.
One, you have to understand the process of building a product, and then two, you have to understand how to fund get the capital together to fund a product.
Sure.
Once again, that R&D effort.
Yeah, absolutely. So, final question: is there anything we haven't covered that you would want to tell the listeners?
I will say this. I think in the last 5-6 years, I've really seen architecture firms slow down. I think early days of BIM, architects led it. I think VR, AR, early days with Unreal Engine and stuff like that. I think architects really led it. I've really seen the last 5 years of really kind of the architects falling behind. And I'm not sure I know why, right? I think because I think a lot of what the innovation is, whether it's robotics, it's really happening on the build side.
Sure.
And on like energy transition and energy management on the on the operation and maintenance side. So I think it might be that some of the macro trends have moved away from where architects think that their expertise lies, which I kind of disagree with that thesis. I mean, I think affordable housing, macro theme, not seeing that much. I see it out of smaller boutique architects talking about it. But I feel like architects have gotten stuck in the BIM and AR, VR quagmire. Mm-hmm. They're just still stuck there.
Interesting. Well, I love that because that's a great challenge for a firm like mine that does have an incubator for technology and is trying to push the profession forward. So I'll be back to you with some more ideas at some point.
Fantastic.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be here on the podcast. You're truly pushing the profession forward, I think, like no one else, which is a service and an amazing place to be in. So thank you for that. To learn more about Shadow Ventures and Shadow Partners, you can check out their website. So it's Shadow Venture, it's shadow.vc. And what's the partners website?
Shadowpartners.co.
Okay, perfect. And then obviously KP's got his Twitter and his LinkedIn and all that good stuff. Anything I missed?
No, that's it. That's about it. We do have our summit coming up. So that's end of October. That's, I think, on the Shadow Partners website, shadowsummit.com.
Awesome. I hope to be there.
All right.
Sounds good. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate the time.